So I'm originally from Ohio, US/Seoul, South Korea, and I came to Tokyo 14 years ago with just two suitcases, no job lined up. On the tourist visa, there was about $2,000 in my bank account, and I first found my first job as an English teacher within 3 weeks of landing in Haneda. And since then, I've moved on to recruitment, talent acquisition, and talent management career with companies like Enworld, Amazon, and Disney, where I have about a decade of experience in total. And now I run a business where I help early career professionals land their first job in Japan. So basically, helping myself from 14 years ago, those who are in their shoes, help them navigate their way to Japan, life and career here. And
Nice.
how I got into recruitment. So I was teaching English for 3 years as my first job in Tokyo. And at that time, I wanted to be a lifetime teacher. So I was serious about teaching. I got certified with a CELTA certificate back in 2010. I did the program in Prague, odd enough. And once I completed the program, I thought I would either go to Japan or Taiwan. Taiwan, I spent about a year there in the late 2000s, Mandarin Chinese. But I thought I had to move around quite a bit, and I wanted a place where I would stay for the long term. And Japan seemed like a right fit because I had lived in Japan before that, and I knew Japan. I liked living in Japan. So I came to Tokyo, and but within those 3 years, English teaching was fun. I like talking to people and teaching English here in Japan to adult learners. It's almost like just chatting, not necessarily drilling down into the grammar or English literature, but rather the spoken version of it with a bit of a brevity or lightness to it. But day one was like day 900. So what I was doing on my first day on the versus 900th day was the same. And there was no upside to career or the salary from the job. So I thought, why don't I get into a job where I can use both Japanese and English? I had JLPT N1 at the time, and I was very fluent in Japanese. And I wanted to be incentivized for my performance as well and make good money. So those were three things. And some of my colleagues talked about getting into recruitment, and I didn't know what that meant. And lucky enough, one of my students at an English school called GABA was working for a company called Enworld in their life sciences or healthcare recruitment team. Well, he was the team manager, was leading the team, and he invited me to apply and join. I got rejected the first time after some interviews, and then I had to convince my so then future manager's manager to reconsider me and got the offer, joined the company, stayed there for 4 years as healthcare.
Wow. I mean, you hustled. It sounds like you knew that you really wanted it and you kind of pushed for it and got it. That's pretty impressive.
Thank you.
I guess, what made you really feel like you wanted to join N-World? Like, did you go to apply for other companies as well, or what was yeah.
So add on to my story that I just shared, my first attempt to get into recruitment was with a another company. This is before I met my then future manager, to be future manager. But I failed in the interview, and this company put me in a small room, gave me a phone book, asked me to call a bunch of different people and ask for names, what recruiters would say call name collect. But
Hmm.
I couldn't do it. So I got rejected. And then a year later, Enworld was the only company I considered. And I wanted to join because of things that my manager told me. And there was this thing called half day, I believe, where you get invited into the office and you talk to a bunch of people who are there. And that sold me. That felt like this is an environment where I could see myself excel and enjoy.
Wow. Well, I guess just to share a little bit, I also got rejected by N-World, but I did not go and have the skills to go and convince them and tell them to hire me anyway. I just took that as like, okay, we're gonna part ways now. But kudos to you for not giving up on that.
No, the credit goes to my manager. He really wanted to have me. So he
Mm,
said, my manager's manager is not convinced. Can you like read these 10 books on sales and write a little like a review of them, what you learn, how much you're eager to get into a sales job and use English and Japanese. And I did that, and that convinced my manager's manager. Little had he known there was a mastermind behind that, all that stuff. That wasn't my idea. It was my manager's idea to bring it that way.
Interesting. Yeah, so I guess getting that connection would be quite useful for someone who's looking to get a job in recruitment and potentially getting a job in Japan as well. I don't know, maybe we can take a slight little detour after this and talk about whether connecting to people directly in Japan would be a good idea. We can discuss this maybe at the end when we talk about your company now. But first of all, I'm curious, how was recruitment? As that first experience, you're getting in there, you're fresh, you ready to make money. What was it like?
So, so this was my recruiter at Enworld was my first corporate job, and that came to me at the age of 27, 28.
Mm-hmm.
No, I was turning 30 or 29, so it was
Wow.
pretty late. Several years or 7 years after college, I got my first
Mm,
corporate job. And I spoke fluent Japanese, but not appropriate for the office or business environment
mm,
because it was all, I got my Japanese from speaking with friends and just from daily use of it.
mm-hmm.
So the learning curve was steep to say the least.
So you used a lot of Japanese?
I use a lot of Japanese. It was, I would say, 60%, 70% Japanese, 30, 40%
Wow.
English was how I
In
operated.
reading, writing, and speaking,
Was intro,
everything.
yeah, reading, speaking, meetings, client meetings, candidate meetings.
Wow.
And what I enjoyed the most was the colleagues. I mean, the environment. It was,
Mm,
well, I left Enrolled in May 2017, and I'm still in touch with many of my ex-colleagues. Whereas, say, Amazon and Disney, not so many. So I'm in touch with more Enrolled colleagues than Amazon and Disney combined. So
interesting.
that shows I built some good relationships there.
Mm,
And second one was being able to use both English and Japanese at work. It was hard but rewarding at the same time. Third one was being able to convince people. I like the fact that I can say and, use different types of techniques or conversation tools to help people see value in the companies and roles that I was helping my clients. I mean, the companies and roles I was recruiting for, and the other way around, do that for vice versa for clients. So those three
mm.
were things that I really like.
The last one was basically like sales skills, I guess, kind of soft communication skills.
True, but ironic enough, the very reason I decided to leave recruitment, the agency
Mm.
side, was the sales aspect,
Oh, interesting. Can you
which I
talk
can
a little
talk
bit
about.
more about, yeah, tell us a little
Yeah,
more about that.
so my focus was within the healthcare team or the life science team, medical devices mainly. I think about 60% of my clients were medical devices companies, and I did mostly front office roles, as well as R&D and technical roles like clinical related, regulatory and quality related, plus flavors and fragrances. They're the R&D roles for them,
Mm-hmm.
and a handful of cosmetics R&D. But I would say it was about 60-70% medical devices, 10-20% pharma, and the rest was flavors and fragrances. And so that was what I was doing. Hmm. Well, 4 years down the road, I was, well, exhausted. And the reasons I joined recruitment industry, three of them, the English, Japanese, being incentivized, and then good money. I realized those two, the money part and being incentivized for work, didn't really motivate me. I thought that would. So even when I had the biggest paycheck from placement bonuses, I wasn't too excited. I was excited, but not overly excited, if you know what I mean.
Mm,
And I didn't enjoy the job. It was going in and going out day in and day out. And one day I wasn't performing, I guess I wasn't performing too well for 1 or 2 quarters. And I thought, if I don't hit the target next quarter, I'm going to leave. That's what I decided to myself and told some of my colleagues that I was close to. I didn't hit the target, and I'm like, okay, this is it. I'm going to move on to HR career. So my plan was to utilize my recruiter experience on the agency side, move in-house as a recruiter or talent acquisition partner, and then from there internally transfer into HR role, which is what I did at Amazon after getting in.
How was that transition? I mean, getting into a place like Amazon or Google, I mean, especially back in that time, it seems like the hurdle is quite high. And what was that interview process like? And and that
So
search, yeah.
I was using both recruitment agencies and direct application to look for a job like my job. And Amazon was introduced from a recruitment agency, and it was with the role was a sourcing recruiter, so basically focused on sourcing candidates for their executive recruiting team.
Interesting.
And I had two offers. One was associate manager for a British electronics manufacturer in talent acquisition space, and the other role was with Amazon. And I, came up with this Excel chart where I was comparing every aspect of the job and my
Hmm.
priorities. I weighted them, gave them scores, and after all the comparisons, I couldn't decide which one to go to, so I literally flipped a coin. It was some daytime in 2017. I was taking a day off or skipping work, and
Hmm.
made that decision. And I called that other company and said I'm taking the other offer, called my recruiter and said I'm going to go to Amazon. And the interview process was, I think I had five interviews. One was with my manager who's from England, who was to be my direct manager, and then my colleague from Japan, and then a talent acquisition leader in other space at Amazon, and another person who's from logistics that's completely unrelated to recruitment, and my skip level manager, so my manager's manager. So I think five interviews, two interviews in English, three interviews in Japanese. Last three interviews were back to back. They call it the loop, all done on the same day, 1 hour. I forgot 45 minutes of 1 hour, and then like a 5-10 minute break in between, and then you just blast through them, and then you get the result out. Does that answer your question? I guess I gave you the
Yeah,
long-winded
I'm,
one.
no, yeah, I mean, the logistics are good to know. I'm just curious also, like, was it difficult? You got rejected from N-World like 4 years before this. And then getting into Amazon seems much more difficult to me at least. So were your interview skills a lot better or and you
So
prepared better or what was that?
going into Enrolled, I knew nothing about how they interview. And going into Amazon, I knew all about how they interview. Luckily, throughout my 4 years at Enrolled, my direct manager was a master at prepping candidates for interviews. He had this whole foundational methods laid out that proved effective every time. And I
Mm,
took the same approach to myself. So for every interview, I think I prepped about, before the first interview, I actually spent about 5 hours writing everything down, prepping. And then before each interview, I prep for about an hour again after that too. So that's the preparation I went through.
wow.
And I don't think it was, yeah. And then, yeah. So yeah, I prepared a lot and I got the offer. There was no
Nice.
drama or ups and downs.
Yeah, I mean it sounds like the recruitment career maybe set you up in some ways, trained you well to even get that job in the first place. How well did it
Absolutely.
train you to then do that job in Amazon? Just to talk briefly about that experience, how well were you prepared then once you got into that internal TA role at a multinational with probably very high expectations, I imagine.
The biggest difference between my job at Enworld and Amazon was the layer of professionals that I was dealing with. So
Mm,
while Enworld, many teams and many individual recruiters there claim to be executive recruiter, the types of candidates and roles I worked there were, even when it's a country manager, was a country manager for a 20-person office or maybe 5-person office and with P&L coming at 1 million, $2 million or bigger. I think the biggest one was like 30 million US dollars, one of the roles I worked with.
wow.
And then I thought that was executive because that's the only executive recruiting I knew. And then I went into Amazon. And after I did that, I was working with candidates from companies with tens of thousands of employees and with their top layers. And these people were, in terms of P&L, on $200 million budget that they're working with. So what I knew as executives just completely flipped around. Not to diminish the value of people or companies that I worked with, but the scale was drastically or astronomically different. So that my skills that I honed, especially around sourcing candidates, whether it's using LinkedIn or cold calling. Cold calling, I couldn't do that as much as Amazon at Amazon because I'm not gonna call some company and say act like someone else, and then turns out that I'm an Amazon employee. That was,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that would fly. So I didn't do much of that, but. Yeah, so direct sourcing skills helped because I was a sourcing recruiter. What didn't help me so much was so the team I at Amazon, I was in a part of a four-person team, and it was sort of like a retained search firm within the company, if I may. So I would be updating the hiring managers on the search progress. I have a whole list of candidates and companies that I would target. So I would go very deep into market mapping. So for example, I was one time doing a search for I guess I'm not sure if I can disclose. So I'm going to just say one department, and let's say their department is fashion, and then I was listing out all the fashion companies in Japan, basically like mapping it out like to the fullest, which is what a lot of retained search firms do. So it was like me transitioning almost into retained search firm from a contingency search. That was what the experience was like. But expectation wise, I think just because it's not very high volume in terms of numbers of jobs that I worked. It was
Mm.
small numbers of jobs, but you go in very, very deep. It's almost like understanding the entire fashion industry in Japan and the top two layers of each company for every big player out there, both Japanese and American, European, whichever. So the amount of work that I was doing was the same, but how it was, I guess the agency work was more broad and wide and shallow,
Mm.
whereas this was more narrow, deep, and goes in very deep. That's, I think, was a difference.
That's very interesting. And I guess I'm also curious because the targets maybe work differently. I'm not sure. I know you said the volume is a little bit lower as well. Day to day, the job itself, right? Are you just purely sourcing? Was there other aspects to it?
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
So my job was I would work directly with hiring managers as well, who would be directors and VPs at Amazon. And these are usually compatible to C-level at other companies, like thousand plus person size companies. And so sourcing, screening them, I guess introducing jobs, briefing hiring managers on biweekly search progress, conducting meetings along with another recruiter who would be in charge of all the other processes. And once the candidate went into the interview, then the other recruiter who's charged of the full cycle would take over. That was
Hmm.
my role at Amazon
Okay.
for my first year and 2 months, 3 months.
Okay. And then I guess transitioning, maybe you had another position, and then I think after that is Disney.
That's correct. Yeah.
Could you just walk us, maybe just briefly through the thought process or what led you to those transitions as well?
Sure, sure. So the initial transition at Amazon was exactly what I had planned for even before coming in. I wanted to go into either L&D or talent management. And one of my
Hmm.
colleagues said, "Hey, this job called Korea Ambassador is about to open because the incumbent is going to leave." I'm like, okay, sounds fun. Sounds fun. What's that all about? It's coaching employees how to perform better at their job. I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
that sounds fun. And I interviewed and I got in, and I think I was in that role for 3 years, and it was wow, very different from executive recruit or anything I had done up until that date. But that was a thought process for that, and from Amazon to Disney was after 3. I was strictly doing performance management, so working with employees who are not up to the performance standards of Amazon, and managers who are managing them, and HRBPs assigned to mitigate or walk them through the process of either improving the performance or seeking other routes. So managers unhappy, HRBPs unhappy, the employees unhappy, and I was in the middle of that for 3 years. And I
Mm,
was not burned out, but I was stressed. I was very much
mm.
worn out, I guess is the right word for it, instead of burned out.
That's a tough place to
Yeah,
be in. Yeah.
yeah. And I
I didn't
thought,
realize that you were a coach, to be honest. I didn't realize that was your job. I mean, it's a different kind of coaching than kind of what I'm doing on my side, but I didn't realize that you had that experience. But yours sounds very, mine is a little bit more like Maimuki and positive. I'm sure you turned some people's careers around as well, but it does sound quite
yeah,
tough.
but I mean, the same coaching techniques that you are using would be applied in my position because
Interesting.
Amazon hired coaches from, or psychologists and counselors from different corporate, who were in corporate roles to perform
Hmm.
the role. So coaching was the initial objective of the role, which shifted later on more into program
Hmm.
management, which I liked better. But because of the nature of the job, I was worn out and I wanted to change roles. And I didn't want to stay at Amazon because going back to recruitment at Amazon, there are two things. One was because Amazon's so big, just for Japan office, as of 2017, there are more than 200 people in HR and recruitment. So one person, would be just only focusing on this area, another person this. I wanted to go more broad. That was one thing. And because Amazon was too big, 6,000 plus just in Japan, I wanted to go somewhere smaller, under 500 or under 1,000. Under 1,000 is big, but compared to Amazon, it was small.
Hmm.
And also manage people. Now, those weren't going to happen if I was going to transition into another recruiter role at Amazon because my 3 years of experience doing talent management, because I was not promoted by the end of that time when I decided to go the recruiter role, I would have to start from a clean slate. That was what I was told when I had a casual meeting with one of the hiring managers, and I said, okay, that's it. I'm gonna leave and seek for another role, and Disney came.
Hmm. Is Disney a small company? It's under 1,000 people, I guess. And
The Japan office is around 700 around the time I
okay,
left.
I
Compared to
definitely don't
Amazon,
think of it feels small.
I felt very small compared to Amazon,
Wow,
in
wow,
a good way, in a very good way.
yeah, yeah. And then you were there for about 1 year. It looks like, and
About 10 months to be precise, but yeah,
10
a
months.
year.
Okay. And then you decided to leave, and you've started your own business now at this point,
That is correct.
correct? Maybe tell us a little bit about what made you want to leave corporate life